I had been a guest at the Ashbrook estate for 41 autumns, and not once in all those years had I seen Charles Ashbrook's nephew, young Lord Edwin Hadley, made to kneel. He did the kneeling on his own that night, and the woman who put him on the parlor rug had not even raised her voice. Her name was Miss Eliza Wren. She was 23 years old, employed as the nursemaid to the Ashbrook grandchildren, and until she sat down at that Steinway, she had never been counted as anything more than a quiet pair of hands at the edge of the room. I am Harold Pemberton. I was 81 that October, and I have told this story perhaps 100 times to anyone who will listen. I tell it again because the people who were not there still believe that pedigree is the only thing that can silence a sneer. It is not. A scale played true will do it faster than any title in the kingdom. The evening began the way those evenings always did. The Ashbrook ballroom had been opened for the harvest dinner, the long table laid in candlelight, the Steinway grand polished to a mirror in the corner near the windows. Eliza moved among the children, settling the youngest, smoothing the elder boy's collar, then withdrew to the panel of chairs reserved for the household staff. She wore a plain gray dress, a starched white apron, her dark hair pinned simply. She did not look at the gentlemen. She looked at the children. It was Edwin who began it. He was 26 that year, just back from his second grand tour, and he had taken to making his presence felt the way a young rooster makes his presence felt in a hen yard. He had been drinking the Ashbrook claret since before the soup. He stood, glass in hand, and announced to the table that he had a wager for the company. "My uncle," he said, smiling at Charles Ashbrook with a son's affection and a stranger's cruelty, "tells me his servants are uncommonly accomplished. I propose a small entertainment. Let one of them come forward and prove it." A small ripple of laughter ran along the table. The wives looked at one another and decided to be amused. The husbands looked at their plates and decided to allow it. I watched Eliza. She did not look up. Edwin's eyes traveled the row of chairs along the wall and settled on her. "You," he said, "the nursemaid, you sit straight as a metronome. Come, give us a tune." Charles Ashbrook tried to laugh it off. "Edwin, leave the poor girl be." "No, no, uncle, this is not cruelty, this is amusement. Miss Wren, is it? Miss Wren, do you play?" Eliza stood up. I will remember the way she stood as long as I have a memory left to me. She did not flinch. She did not bow her head. She set down the small cloth she had been folding, smoothed her apron once, and said, "A little, sir." "A little, capital, then you shall give us a little." He gestured at the Steinway. "Something gentle, a nursery rhyme will do." Surely a nursemaid knows a nursery rhyme. The laughter at the table came a half-second too late, and it was the wrong shape, the shape of people who suddenly suspect they are watching something they will not want to remember. Eliza looked across the room at the piano. Then she looked at Edwin. "What would you like, my lord?" He smiled. He had a good smile when he chose to use it, which made the smile he was using now worse. "Liszt," he said. "Let us hear Liszt. The liebestraum, if you know it. I shall be lenient. Play one bar, one true bar, and I shall bow to you publicly, right here, before everyone. I give you my word as a gentleman." He was joking. He was joking the way men joke when they are certain they will not be made to pay. The table laughed properly this time, relieved that the joke had a clear punchline. Eliza would falter, blush, sit down, and the moment would pass into the comfortable haze of dinner stories. Charles Ashbrook half rose, ready to dismiss her with kindness and end it. She thanked Edwin for the choice, walked the length of the ballroom in her plain gray dress, and sat down at the piano. I had been listening to pianos in that ballroom since before Edwin was born. I knew the throat of that Steinway. I knew its slow lower octaves and the bright bell of its upper third. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was that the woman who had been singing the Ashbrook babies to sleep for 2.5 years had grown up in a parish hall in Yorkshire where the curate's daughter had been trained by a Viennese exile, and that she, the curate's daughter's silent shadow, had stood at the curate's daughter's elbow for 13 years and learned everything by ear before she ever touched a key. She had owned a piano once, after a small inheritance. She had sold it to feed her younger brothers. She had not played for an audience in 7 years. She sat the way her teacher had taught her to sit. Spine straight, shoulders soft, the heels just touching the floor. She looked once at the keyboard the way a sailor looks at the sea before he sets out on it. The slow, honest look of a person who knows what she is about to attempt and respects it. Then she settled her hands above the keys and was very still. The room, which had been ready to laugh, took a breath in spite of itself. She lifted her hands. She did not play the liebestraum the way it is played at the conservatoire, with its slow climb and its grand cresting wave. She played it the way a person plays a piece she has carried inside her chest like a candle. The first 3 notes were so quiet that the candles on the table seemed to lean toward them. The 4th note rose, and the room, which had begun the bar with laughter still on its lips, did not finish that laughter. It stopped halfway. It hung in the air, and Eliza simply played past it. I felt the bar end. I felt it the way you feel a soft bell strike at the bottom of a long stair. Edwin opened his mouth, perhaps to be funny, perhaps to honor his wager with a comic bow that would let him keep his dignity. He did neither. Eliza had already begun the 2nd bar. The melody of the liebestraum, when it is truly played, has the strange property of making any listener feel that the music has been written about him personally. Eliza was not performing it. She was speaking it. The steinway, which had stood in that ballroom for 40 years and been used mostly to accompany the off-key carol singers at Christmas, answered her like a horse that has finally been ridden by someone who knows what it is. By the 3rd bar the children were turning in their chairs. By the 4th, the wife of the magistrate had set down her wineglass without taking her eyes from the player. By the 5th, Charles Ashbrook was leaning forward with the expression of a man who has just realized something has happened in his house that he will need many years to understand. Edwin did not laugh. He did not move. His hand, holding the glass, lowered slowly to the cloth. I watched his face in the candlelight. I have watched many young men in my time receive their first hard lesson. It is always the same face, the face of a person realizing that the world he had thought he was master of has, in fact, been quietly waiting for him to grow up. Edwin's face did all of that in the space of perhaps 4 bars of music. I have never, before or since, seen so much understanding arrive in a single human face in so short a time. The piece climbs. Every pianist who has ever sat at the liebestraum has felt the place where it climbs, where the right hand begins to weave the long descending figures across the singing left, where the music seems to lift the bones out of the room and hold them above the candles for a moment before letting them down again. Eliza took that climb the way a swimmer takes a wave. The hall did not breathe. I have sat in concert halls in London and Vienna where audiences paid a guinea apiece for tickets, and I have never heard a hush like the hush in that ballroom on the night of the Ashbrook harvest dinner. She reached the central swell. The long descending chord, the one that always makes the very oldest listeners shut their eyes, broke over the table, and one of the children, the 4-year-old, made a small noise of pure surprise, the way a baby makes a noise when first shown the sea. His mother put her hand over her mouth. Eliza did not look up. She had asked one question of Edwin, "What would you like, my lord?" and she was answering it. The footman at the door had stopped moving. He had been about to clear the dessert plates, and he stood there with his arms full of china, and not one person told him to set it down. The piece moves, after the swell, into the place where the player must decide what kind of human being she is going to be at the keyboard. There are pianists who hammer it. There are pianists who hurry it. Eliza did neither. She slowed. She let the bell of the steinway speak each note as if she were laying a row of small lit lamps along a windowsill. The cook had come in from the kitchen. I had not heard the door open. She stood by the sideboard with her hands twisted in her apron and her eyes wet, and nobody told her to leave. By the 10th bar, and I counted, because I have always counted the bars of the liebestraum, ever since I was a boy in my mother's parlor, Edwin Hadley stood up. He did not stand up to interrupt her. He did not stand up to leave. He stood up the way a man stands up in church when his understanding of the day has been altered. He came around the table. He passed his uncle. He passed the magistrate's wife. He walked the length of the ballroom in his silk waistcoat and his polished boots, and stopped at the corner of the steinway, and waited for the bar to end. Eliza did not stop. She played through the recapitulation, the long, tender return, the place where the melody bows its head and lets the harmony catch it. She let the last chord settle, and then she set her hands very gently in her lap. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the candles. Edwin Hadley, 26 years old, heir to a barony just back from his grand tour, dropped to one knee on the parlor rug beside the piano bench. He set his right hand flat over his heart. He bent his head. "Miss Wren," he said. His voice was not at all the voice he had used to make the wager. "I gave you my word as a gentleman, I keep it. Forgive me." Eliza inclined her head slightly in the direction of his bow. She did not smile in triumph. She did not even look surprised. She looked the way a woman looks who has been waiting a very long time in private, for the world to remember a thing she always knew to be true. The expression was so simple and so honest that the magistrate's wife, who had spent half her life learning the small cruelties of polite society, turned her face into her husband's shoulder and wept. There is a kind of silence that ought never to be broken too quickly. The Ashbrook ballroom held that silence for what felt like a long minute. Then the cook, by the sideboard, began to clap, a single pair of hands, slow and unembarrassed. The magistrate's wife joined her. Then Charles Ashbrook stood, and then the rest of the table, and the children who had been turning in their chairs got up and toddled toward the piano with their small faces full of wonder. And Eliza put out her hand, and let the youngest grip her finger. And the standing ovation in the Ashbrook ballroom that night was given not by the dignitaries, but by everyone in the room at once, including the boy who had brought in the firewood and had been watching from the door. Edwin did not get up at once. He waited until Eliza very gently said, "Please, my lord, stand. There is no need." He stood. He kept his head bowed a moment longer than he had to. Then he turned to face the table. "I would like to apologize," he said, "to Miss Wren and to my uncle and to every person in this room. I have spoken all my life as if accomplishment belonged to the people who have the right names. I have just been corrected. I will try, in whatever years are given me, to remember the correction." He looked back at Eliza. "Will you allow me, ma'am, to come and listen sometimes when you play for the children? If you play for the children, I would consider it a privilege." She inclined her head, the same plain, quiet inclination she had given 100 times when the cook asked her to take a tray to the nursery, and she said, "Whenever you wish, sir." The dinner did not really resume. The plates were taken away. The candles were trimmed. People stayed on for an hour longer than the harvest dinners usually ran, talking quietly in clumps near the windows. And from time to time, someone would look across the room at the woman in the gray dress sitting on the bench with the children gathered at her knees, and lower his voice, as one does in a place where something important has happened. I walked her to the nursery door at the end of that evening. I am not the sort of man who makes speeches. I told her only that she had given me back something I thought I had lost 40 years ago, which was the feeling that the world was capable of justice in the small ways as well as the large. She thanked me and went in to put the children to bed. The cook, when I passed the kitchen on my way to the guest wing, was still standing at the sink with her back to the door. I heard her say to the scullery girl very quietly, "I have served in great houses my whole life. I have never in any of them heard a thing like that. Don't you ever forget it." The scullery girl, who could not have been more than 13, said, "No, ma'am, I won't." Charles Ashbrook took her aside the next morning. He offered to pay for her to study at the Royal Academy, said he would settle a small income on her family, said he wished she would consider it. She thanked him. She told him she would think about it. She did not give him an answer for some weeks. She had 3 younger brothers in Yorkshire whose welfare she had been working for since the day her mother died, and she would not say yes to a kindness until she had thought it through to the last shilling. Charles waited. Edwin waited. The household, in its quiet way, waited. In the end she did go to study, 2 years later, with the curate's daughter from Yorkshire who had taught her the liebestraum by candlelight as a girl. The two of them played a duet at a charity recital in Manchester that I traveled the length of England to attend, and I wept the whole second movement. And Edwin Hadley, who had come up on the same train as I had, and who had paid for half the front row to be filled with the children of the poorhouse, so that they might hear what music could do, wept the third. But the part of the story that stays with me, the part I would like to leave you with, is the part that happened in the parlor before the recitals and the academies and the duet. It is the part where a young man who had spent his life believing the world owed him a soft chair walked across a ballroom in his polished boots, knelt on the rug beside a steinway, set his hand on his heart, and asked a nursemaid to forgive him. He kept the promise he made on his knees. He came to the nursery often after that, and sat in the corner while Eliza played the children to sleep, and he was very quiet, and once or twice, when the firelight was low and the baby's breathing had settled, I saw him close his eyes the way men close their eyes when music is doing for them what they did not know they needed done. He paid for her brother's schooling. He did it without telling her. She found out 2 years later and thanked him quietly at the next nursery hour, and he looked at the carpet and said only that she had given him more in 3 minutes at a piano than he had given anyone in his whole life. A piano can do that to a man, if the right pair of hands sits down at it. And the right pair of hands, I have come to believe in my 82nd year, does not always belong to the person at the head of the table. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet woman at the wall, the one nobody noticed walk in, the one who has been carrying a candle in her chest for 13 years and waiting only for someone, anyone, to ask her, please, to set it down on the keyboard and let it burn. Edwin Hadley still tells the story when he is asked. He always begins it the same way. I made a wager once, he says, with a nursemaid. I lost it before the second bar, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think he is right. I think it was the best thing that ever happened to several of us. And on quiet autumn evenings, when the candles are lit in my own small parlor and someone puts on a recording of the Liebestraum, I am no longer in my parlor at all. I am back at the Ashbrook estate, standing very still beside the long table, watching a young woman in a gray dress lift her hands above the keys of a polished steinway. And I am holding my breath, the way the whole room held its breath that night, waiting for the first true note.